and gentlemen, for some reason, as your resident MGA board members, I get the honour and pleasure of introducing you to our speaking session today. Just a brief intro for those of you who haven't been to one of these events before. We as the MGAA are trying to adopt a position in the managing general agent space where we bring up conduct, we bring up education, we bring up the whole knowledge base. Rich Brown and I went to the FCA 5 years ago and said, we represent MGAs. They said, oh, we know what we do. No, we didn't. They hadn't a clue what an MGA was. So we're in a pleasant position that 5 years later, A, they do actually recognise us, and B, they do actually recognise what an MGA looks like, and they're listening to us. That's nice to hear, okay? That is really nice to hear. This session today, we do our lunchtime speaking sessions at in the old library at Lloyd's, and we're very grateful for Lloyd providing that facility. But today, this is something slightly different, okay? We're calling this, as you can see on the list, I don't need to on the board, I don't need to tell you what it is, shape and share. This is an interactive session. Sarah is very kindly going to chair this session, but we're ably helped today by some old friends and some good friends, as it were. Graham, I've known Graham now for, it's a long time, Graham, isn't it? Yeah. But Graham was the managing director of Aqueduct Underwriting, part of the R.K. Harrison Group, until very recently. Has his own little project, has been is an NED investor in a few other things like Bright Talk, and generally Graham knows this space and has been in it for a very, very long time. I mean, I don't say very long time. That makes you sound very old, doesn't it? Peter is another good friend. Peter and I worked together at Oxygen, where he was the life director there. So he was a broker, but he also had the MGA side that went on as OIM over to became Penn Underwriting at AGG, and he's now the compliance officer and director at Asper. Sorry, Asper. Oh, I didn't know that. So I should say that. Sarah obviously is one of my colleagues. Until very recently, she was the director of corporate governance at Penn Underwriting, which is part of the Gallagher Group. And you know, she knows this space and has been dealing with the space and has come in to probably put me right on most things. Let's put it that way. And then, of course, I come to Alistair, our good friends at BLM, Berrymans, as some of you might know them. Alistair deals with the engagement in government bodies, regulatory events and things like that, and has been coordinating a lot of the stuff on the Insurance Act, and that with David, and that David Herzl, who you may know is the former commissioner there, and they've been doing a fabulous job on that. They did a great presentation, or two presentations I think it was, with regard to the Insurance Act, which was really well received. So if you've got a question on the Insurance Act, you may want to focus on there at Alistair. And lastly, she's hiding away over here, but you put a hand up there. Gabriella is actually from the Lloyd's Conduct Standards Assurance team. So if you've got any nice awkward questions with regard to Lloyd's, how anachronistic it is, how back in the dark ages it is, Gabriella will enlighten you that it isn't quite as bad as it used to be. Okay? Is that fair, Gabriella?
Not sure it's fair, but...
I think you'll get it. Mobile phones, if you can turn them on to silent, buzz, whatever, but please don't let them ring too much, because we are podcasting this, so you will be able to relive these lovely moments yet again. Not expecting any fire drills, so if the building starts to burn down and the alarm goes, run for it, exits there and there. Well, windows are not an option, okay, let's put it that way. And I think that's all it is. Evaluation forms, please can you fill them at the end, that would be great. And we are also issuing another Survey Monkey sort of thing in the next few weeks. It's specifically on conduct, but it will go to your key contact. Now, I'm not sure whether you're the key contact for any of the MGA stuff. So if you've got a chief executive who's the key contact, nobble him. It's anonymous, it relates to conduct, and you are probably the people who should be answering it. Well, not your CEOs, let's put it that way. Okay, I think you get the hint there. With that, I'm going to hand over to Sarah. I'm going to keep out the way and enjoy the day. Thank you.
Firstly, thank you everyone for coming. It's amazing that we had such a turnout, but hardly surprising seeing as conduct is the buzzword at the moment, and particularly in the MGA space, potentially could be a business differentiator. So what we're going to do here today is I'm going to give a brief introduction to my take on conduct within the MGA arena, and then pass over to Alistair and Peter, who are going to be giving the regulatory stance. And then Graham has kindly offered to share some of his experiences, both in putting together a pack for the board, but also sitting on the board and interpreting that data in that place. So hopefully that will give you a good starter and some areas in which you can ask pertinent questions and share your own experiences. So welcome, and I hope you find this afternoon productive. So there are very few slides, as I say, because we hope that this is an interactive session rather than us sitting up here delivering what we think is the world according to us. So I will just take you to the first slide in the pack, however, which is something I've put together, trying to diagrammatically show where I think the MGA sits from a conduct perspective. Handily, the FCA decided to leave the term conduct undefined and has left it to individual firms to decide what conduct looks like in their arena. So obviously the onus is on us to determine and demonstrate what we think conduct risk looks like within our own organisations and how we are going to be compliant. The position of the MGA, I would assert, is rather more complicated perhaps than that of the insurer. I would say that, wouldn't I? We are regulated as an intermediary, and we actually are the insurer's agents. So we are betwixt and between where we are. Some of us represent Lloyd's capacity, some of us represent the company market, and many of us have carrier arrangements with both. So Lloyd's helpfully provided the conduct MI requirements, which came into force at the early part of this year. And those of us who work within the composite market or the London market will find that some of our larger carriers have different views on what they want as far as data and conduct. So it is or can be quite confusing. We have a number of stakeholders, and we have a number of requirements and masters, if you like, with whom we should comply and provide that data. So really, what do we need to think about in the MGA space from a conduct perspective? Well, we aren't different to insurers. As I say, we are their agents. And it does touch every part of our business, the governance, risk and the compliance frameworks. Ultimately, we need to make sure that we're delivering fair outcomes for the client and we are protecting the market's integrity. There does need to be that demonstration of the board engagement, and the difficult thing that flows from that is the conduct culture which flows throughout the business and its staff. And that is perhaps the most difficult part for us to demonstrate. We can all give data on conduct metrics, but how do we know and how can we evidence that our staff understand it? Conduct MI, what perhaps should we be thinking about? It needs to be demonstrated in our executives' behaviour. Does our strategy, vision and do the knowledge and the behaviours of our executive live and breathe what conduct means to our company? Judgments and decisions, do we make sure that risk culture and MI is embedded in everything we do? And when we recruit and reward our staff, does that reflect conduct behaviours? It's not just about customer outcomes. We have to consider the products, the sales and the sales force and how we distribute our products to the market. The fundamentals I think we need to all bear in mind when we're looking at conduct risk MI is the fact that one size does not fit all. So for each business unit within our organisation, there may be one element of conduct that's particularly pertinent, but the board directors do not need the same data. This shouldn't be perceived to be a data collection or collation exercise. It's the interpretation of that data and feeding it to the business units and or the committee structures within the organisation so they can act upon it appropriately and make and change both the behaviours and the products that we have out there in the market. We need to make sure that the MI that we deliver and we provide the board provokes communication, engages and provides a forum for challenge so that we can action and improve our cultural, our corporate structure. And increasingly, senior managers who fail to observe or recognise the need for strong conduct risk MI will ultimately fail firstly in meeting FCA expectations about what conduct looks like and having done the right thing, but with the senior manager's responsibility, the senior manager's regime which came into play in insurers just earlier this week, they also face personal liability. So you will see why conduct is so important for the insurers and for the MGA who act as their insurers, as their agent, why it's increasingly becoming a contractual term that sufficient conduct MI and data is made available both to the board within the MGA but also available for the insurers so they can be seen to be doing the right thing. I'm going to pass over now to Alistair, if I may.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I just wanted to tease out some points that Sarah made and really look at some of the principles, I think, behind conduct risk as we see them rather than elements of detail. And I'm not going to go to the sort of 18 strands that are in the Lloyd's standard. I think you can probably boil it down to around about 7 or 8, which I've kind of called the sort of 8 P's of conduct risk, which is a horrible acronym, but let's go with it for a couple of minutes at least. These can kind of come in any order, I think. I mean, first up, processes. What are they? Are they clearly understood? Are they documented? Are you measuring what's going on in your business process? And indeed, are you measuring the right things? Not just what's going on, but what's not going on and what's not working properly. Second would be placement, obviously around the sales process itself, but also around the distribution networks and how your products actually get to market, get to the end user, get to the customer that's going to need the cover in the future. Third is people, a very obvious one, and people widely cast. That includes the executive management that Sarah mentioned, and it includes the guys on the front line that are either selling the products to the customers or somewhere in that distribution chain that they may find themselves. What they do, their competence and their training has got to be documented in a way that you can account for their performance pretty quickly to the senior management that needs to see that information. Fourth, I think, is products. Again, no surprise. Product design, right choice for the customer, dialogue around what products the customer needs. Excuse me. And that feeds into the fifth element, which I think is performance. What protection are they getting? Is it the right choice for the customer? How will the proposition actually respond when they come to make a claim? And I think probably looking at that slightly differently, I think performance, at least you see in the FCA's recent interventions on GI add-ons, is also about value and the claims ratio in particular, which they're looking at in some of the add-on products out there. And they're beginning to start a pilot about performance, claims ratio, publication of claims ratios in respect of certain add-on products. The obvious ones that they were looking at were gap insurance for motor vehicles, legal expenses was another one, and I think those are areas that may well come under increasing focus in the next couple of years. The sixth of my 8 Ps, pay and perks. What's the remuneration of your staff? What's the remuneration of the people that distribute your products? Is that going to put them in conflict with any regulatory objectives? And let's not forget that the remuneration structure perhaps might, in a broad definition, include corporate hospitality and other perks. And I'm thinking there deliberately around the regime in the Bribery Act and how you police that and how that's reported and accounted for in your organisation. I know that we, as a law firm, have got a fairly robust process around that and even really quite modest gifts that you might get for helping out a customer, or indeed, for doing a commercial conference, have to be declared to our partnership board. I haven't had anything refused yet, but then I suspect I haven't had anything more than a couple of bottles of wine from time to time, which is not going to affect key business decisions. But it's really important you've got a process like that in place that is documented and accountable, and people know where it is and know which side of the line they have to report on that. 7 and 8 are probably linked. Position, i.e., is anybody in your staff dealing with customers in a position of potential conflict with the customer outcomes that Sarah mentioned and some of the business drivers that you're going to have commercially? Are they in a position to give the customer the right product at the right price for the customer, or are their pay and perks driving them in a particular way? And I think we're long since past the scandals of decades ago, where very high commissions around pensions in particular drove certain behaviours. But I think we'd be highly naive to take that as a given, and I'm sure close scrutiny of the conflict position is absolutely critical here. The final point I was going to make, say it's related, it's principle with an AL rather than LE at the end. Pretty obvious in a binary contract as to who you're acting for, but as the distribution chain lengthens and you've got more people in there, the position can become a little more blurred as to who's acting for whom, the insurer and the insured. I think that's obviously coming under the FCA scrutiny in respect of the work that they did quite recently on delegated authority. And in terms, they said it's often unclear as to who's acting for whom in these transactions. That's a big gap that I think needs to be nailed down here. And as David mentioned at the outset, also I think absolute clarity on that is really going to help when we get to August this year, when the Insurance Act comes in, because the Insurance Act doesn't mention anywhere the word broker, and it only mentions agent about 3 or 4 times, really just to say an agent is somebody who acts for a principal, and the principal is the insured or the insurer. So you really need to know which side of the line you're on in these relationships. So really just to draw that together, entirely agree with Sarah, this is about customer outcome first and foremost. Some of the approaches you see come at this from executive behaviour, then to how their judgments translate into employee behaviour, and how that translates into customer impact and effect. I think that's right, but for me, I prefer it to be the other way up, so that customer effect and customer impact is first and foremost, so that when you're thinking of conduct, you have a customer-centric regime right at the heart of what you're doing.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think as someone who's come from the intermediary sector to the Lloyd's market, it's been, what strikes me really is how indeterminate the intermediary sector is in terms of conduct. There's a sort of lack of definition, a lack of characterisation about exactly what intermediaries are supposed to be doing, compared with the situation in Lloyd's. And obviously I appreciate that MGAs may have a number of different carriers, and that also creates uncertainty and perhaps a lack of clarity. And I wonder if one of the ways to address that is for MGAs to lead on conduct risk rather than to follow. Let me unwrap that a little bit and expand on some of those points. I work for a company, a group called Aster, and we've just established this company, which is named on my sign here as Underwriting Management. We're not an MGA, but we're an MGA platform. So the idea is that independent MGA businesses can operate on our platform, and we provide certain services and infrastructure for them. There's currently one MGA on the platform, and the venture is very much still in its youth. But it's something that Aster is trying to build up and is very interested in developing. Currently, though, Aster's main focus is very much on its Lloyd's managing agency, which is a full-grown Lloyd's business. We're a third-party managing agent, so we kind of manage other people's syndicates, I guess you could say. Other people being the capital providers and the employers. So we've engaged with Lloyd's. We've engaging with Lloyd's for the last couple of years on conduct risk, and we're steeped in all that. And many of you will be familiar with the minimum standards, MS11, and we've been through this hundreds of times and had to do self-assessments and develop our frameworks and so on in response to this. And so when we come to set up our MGA platform, it's very tempting to refer to this and to look for efficiencies, I guess, and synergies, and use the Lloyd's framework for the MGA platform as the underwriting management. So there are 88 requirements in there, and that's rather more than Alistair set out. I liked your summary very much, Alistair. But the advantage of this was it does set out pretty clearly what a version, at least, of what what it is that the carriers anyway are supposed to be doing, defines conduct risk, I think, pretty helpfully in a way which the FCA has never quite managed to do. And building on that point a little bit, I think, I feel, you might disagree with me, I suppose, but I think the FCA, in terms of general insurance intermediaries, the intermediary space, the FCA doesn't speak a lot to intermediaries. There have been a handful of speeches, there's obviously thematic reviews that we all pay a lot of attention to. But again, from the Lloyd's experience, we've had so much pressure from the FCA on Lloyd's to get this right, and so little pressure, in my experience, on the MGA side of things to get this right. So it really feels like the FCA is almost looking to Lloyd's to sort itself out and then to put pressure on MGAs to sort themselves out, and perhaps the FCA sees that as efficient use of its resources or whatever it might be. But it feels like regulation by proxy. So there's not a lot of text, there's not a lot of guidance, there's not a lot of information that I can see that's immediately relevant to intermediaries, but what you do get is a lot of pressure from various sources who are sort of intermediating what the FCA is saying to them and sort of piling that onto you, onto us as MGAs. That's quite a difficult position to be in. I think Sarah was sort of teasing out some of those points earlier. The last thing I want to say is, wave another document at you, is the RPPD, which resurfaced after 8 years. And I think it's such an important document that I printed a couple off and brought them along to wave in your general direction. The RPPD was produced by the FSA in 2007 as a way of explaining to people in chains where the responsibility for compliance with TCF should sit. Because people were looking around and saying, well, you know, I'm the carrier, do I have to manage the broker's compliance with TCF? Do I have to manage the coverholder's compliance with TCF? Have I got to manage everybody? Is everybody managing everybody else? What's going on? And this was, indirectly, I guess, the FSA's response to that. And it emerged again, didn't it, last year? Those of you who were following the FCA's thematic review on delegation of authority or outsourcing, where they said, look, this document tells you what different parties in the chain are responsible for. And basically it says that you're not responsible for everything. If you're in the chain, you're responsible to the extent that what you're doing affects the outcome. And that's, I think, pretty helpful guidance, and people should, I recommend that people go back to that and kind of absorb the lessons of that, because it does give you a bit of a steer about where the MGA sits in all this. And if anyone wants a copy, I've got a couple of spares here. So we're in this place where there's perhaps not a lot of clarity, not a lot of consistency. There's bits and pieces of guidance, and I'm just wondering if the response to that is to go onto the front foot and define for ourselves what our approach to conduct is, using some of the ideas that Alistair and Sarah have got, and I know Graham's going to talk about it as well. Set out your own stall and take that to the carriers and say, we've got all the bases covered. We've done this for ourselves. We've thought it all through. We're not going to be driven by what you tell us or what you might require from us. We've got our own product design policy and procedures and framework. We collect our own MI. We've got good capability for collecting the right information, for analysing it, and for reporting it to you. We can handle complaints well, and perhaps the minimum standards are not a bad place to start if you need a place to start, but there should be advantages to doing that, I think, that are commercial as much as regulatory, because you can solve the problem for the carrier, and maybe some of the carriers are struggling as much as we feel we are to come up with satisfactory answers to these questions. And I think possibly the MGA's response, possibly the best MGA's response, is to say, we will solve this problem for you, and take it from there. It requires a sophisticated approach, I think. But if you can get there, I think there'll be big advantages to doing that.
Thank you.
Hi.
Great.
I'd like to apologise first to the MGAA for not wearing a suit. But I was started up a business and I'm in one of those tech startup places. And if you wear a suit in there, they either think you're defending them in the court later that afternoon, or they come and ask you for money for their startup. So, and so I keep a low profile. But I'm not trying to set up what we did at ACTA as a paradigm or say we got it right or anything else. I just think that when we looked at the risk of business, we felt we were in a very, very pressured place because we were owned by a broker and we were answerable to a carrier. And that put quite a lot of conflicts of interest right at the heart of what we were doing, and we needed to manage those. And then I started to read the stuff on conduct that came out, and I entirely agree with Peter. You know, in the end, you've got to decide what it is that you mean by it, and then you've got to run your business to it. And I believe that if we fight conduct or box ticket, then we're the only people who are kidding ourselves, and that you have to embed that conduct or that way of running your business into your whole business. It's got to be authentic, because as Gabrielle said, as soon as you walk into a place, you know whether it's embedded or not. You're doing an audit. And I believe that you could have fantastic underwriting performance and have a really great niche product that's delivering a great result to the carrier, and that you will lose your delegated authority if you don't get this bit right, because of this pressure going down the chain from the regulator and from Lloyd's. So the number one rule in this is no box ticking. It's got to be embedded. And what I've given you here is just and Jeff, who is at Jewel, and I work very hard on this, is the output. And I think there's a lot in business. It's sometimes easier to dictate what the output's going to be, and then it forces everybody to manage the business for that output. And that's a way of embedding. Because if you try and do it the other way round, you get yourself to say the output is going to be this report that we're going to show to the board. That's a cracking way of getting people to organise their business around that report. And the old adage, what gets measured gets done, is pretty true on this. So and I think that basically we broke it down into 5 different buckets that you wanted to look at. And the first is really product life cycle, because you have got to look at the consumer outcomes, the customer outcomes in SME as well as in consumer. And you've got to look at the risks attached to the new businesses that you're bringing into the MGA, and you've got to run those, and you've got to be able to show the board that you've considered those risks. So the first thing is, what's your product life cycle governance like? And it's not just like giving birth to an elephant, you know, a lot of grunting, a lot of shoving, a lot of pushing, a lot of pain, the product comes out, and then you never have sex again because it's just too much hassle. You've got to think about these things as ongoing processes in your business. And so you've got to have an ongoing product review, you've got to think about security behind it. And if you can get that bit right, nobody's going to come in and say you haven't considered consumer outcomes or end customer outcomes. And that's a pretty big tip for the carriers, I think. The next bit is further on to that, the treating customers fairly. And again, the output would be a board report. It need be no more than 4 pages long, and you're going to show the exceptions in there. So if you've got an employee report, and you say we had 83 employees, and now we've got 81, and we had 5 leavers and 3 joiners, who were the leavers? Were they senior underwriters? Were they junior underwriters? So you just help the board to look at the areas they need to. If there's nothing to say, you don't say it. And what you do is you highlight the areas where there is an exception. On training and competence, have you looked after the training needs of your staff? Has everybody taken all of those continuing education things on anti-money laundering they need to take? And again, just report back, and where you've got a problem, put it in red. Your talent management, because it's all about people. How you handle complaints, how many complaints you've had, what happened, what were the outcomes. If you're doing file reviews, which you should be, have you done all the ones you said you'd do? Because I think the worst thing in the world, there's only one thing worse than, the absolute worst thing in the world is not to have any of this done. The second worst thing is to say you're doing it and not do it. And the next worst up the list is to say you're doing it, do it, but not demonstrate to the board that you've done it or you've measured it, because you're going to be found absolutely banged to rights if you don't demonstrate back that you put all these things in place. And so I think on the TCF, that's a really big deal for the customer outcome as well. Conflicts of interest is a really big deal for, as I said, a broker-owned MGA or a broker-affiliated MGA, but it's true for everybody. And it's this time back of the MI. Can you check that you're not, particularly with an in-house broker, but your broker's not getting a better rate online, getting more commission, and giving you all the new business? It's a pretty easy thing to look at, and the quote-to-bind ratio is astonishingly 90%. It didn't happen for us, sadly. It was the other way around. We found it harder to do business with other in-house broker than anybody else. I think you have to watch this stuff and you have to report to people. So the financial incentives that you're giving out, the financial incentives to your staff, have you got underwriters who are on a volume deal with no underwriting fallback? Because that is not good. And then this expenses monitoring. Is the same person being entertained in the same place the whole time? There are red flags there, and you have to look at that. On the business risk and compliance, I think that's pretty obvious. Everybody kind of does that stuff. The last one is actually the one we got to, the last, which is how you actually run the business from a governance point of view. If you say you're going to have a team meeting with the Caribbean team once a week, did you have the Caribbean team meeting once a week? How many did you miss? And giving that back to the board is a great way of keeping everybody honest. And again, because you're measuring it, you're likely to have those meetings. But it does show up problems. If somebody's continually cancelling their weekly meeting or their monthly meeting, you've probably got a management problem there. So it's a great way of looking at your business. Have you got business plans for everybody? Is everybody aligned in the business around what the strategy is? Do the individual business plans add up to the strategic vision you've got for the company? Or are you saying we're marching up the hill and everybody else is marching downhill because they all think that's the best place to go? And this is a place where you can surface that stuff. And if you say you're going to talk to staff every quarter or every month or every week, have you done it? Have you come good on what you said you'd do? And then lastly, how your binders are. And I sort of think this is the way we solved it. It's not prescriptive. And it's up to different businesses have different risk profiles. Ours was particularly fierce around potential conflicts of interest, and so we spent a lot more time on that. But if you can come up with something and define it, and then deliver on it, and crucially when you get that cover holder audit, and they go, right, how's your conduct? You go, there's my board report. They go, right, okay, no problem, no questions, because you're doing it. Obviously you've got to act on it, you've got to interpret it, but the first thing is to have it there and to make it easy and understandable. And it's not a prescriptive thing, but I think you can sleep a bit easier at night if you try and crack these problems. They're really important. That's me.
That's great, thank you. Well, I hope you found that as a useful introduction and for what were supposedly different but very similar takes on conduct within the MGA space. And I'd now like to hand it over to the floor. Does anyone have a question for anyone on the panel? Or is anyone willing to share their own experiences of conduct within the MGA space?
Can I ask one question to Peter then? Because since I'm the provocateur from the outside. So Lloyd's has put out its 88 golden rules or whatever it is, Peter. You're telling me that the company market is a little bit sort of flaky, doesn't quite know what it wants. Are you seeing any difference between what the company markets are asking of you with regard to governance and managing your risk, as opposed to what Lloyd's put out in their 88 risk? Or are they pretty much complementary and the same?
What I've seen from Lloyd's is much more specific and much more extensive and much more developed than, I can't talk for the company market as a whole, but for the carrier that we've been dealing with on the company side. And it just makes me wonder, it's a question really, because I can't, as I say, I don't have that knowledge of the company market as a whole, but it makes me wonder quite where some companies are in their conduct, compliance and their planning, and I'm not aware of how much pressure those companies are under from the FCA to sort this out, or what timescales those companies might be looking at. It just raises the question for me of the diversity of practice, which I think then becomes a problem for the MGA, who's potentially having to deal with a number of different counterparties.
I might be able to help on that, because in my former life at Penn we had a number of large insurers and managing agents, and I would say the larger insurers are actually quite well advanced in what they're looking for internally from a conduct perspective. I think that would be fair, Nicola, would you?
Absolutely.
And actually it doesn't largely sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. But I think to a large extent they're not looking at different metrics from Lloyd's per se. They may be looking at more, would be my view, but they're in the same areas effectively as Graham has highlighted in this slide, I think would be fair to say. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think from our perspective, going back to Graham's point, is there's a little bit of a dance going on in terms of MGAs coming with data and insight that helps us satisfy our oversight, and also kind of the balance of insurers being prescriptive, but somewhere between there we need to find a way through, and I guess that's the bit that's challenging. You know, where do we meet in the middle so everybody's regulatory obligations to conduct are met without kind of being one side dominating the other to the detriment of the business.
Well, if you think about it, if you're the owner of a business and you think about your risk and your own shares in the business, this is a potentially lethal risk for the business because you get your DA taken away. And so one ought to be more concerned than the carrier because their business is going to so your business is going to. So if I would feel if the carrier came in and said to me, we found you completely wanting, I'd want to shoot myself. I'd hang my head in shame because it would be just terrible. Because how could they find more risk in the business than I've been able to find myself? But I agree with you. It has to be right size, and and to Peter's point, that's why it's much better to be on the front foot. This is what I think. You tell me where you disagree, but this is how we manage it. Put the gauntlet down, and people come in and go either, that's the biggest load of rubbish I ever saw. They go, yeah, all right, it's fine.
Could I ask you a question then, Graham? So if you were a small MGA, how do you think you would manage that, and what powers of persuasion would you have when you're up against some of the larger insurers?
You just have to believe it, and they'll say it's authentic, and if you don't believe it, they'll find you out. And so if you box tick it, you're dead.
So in your experience, do you find that they are actually receptive when an MGA goes forward with an idea and a plan of this is what we're going to do, even though it's not necessarily what they are looking for?
Well, that's what we did at Penn, and I found people very receptive. But that's why I'm interested if smaller MGAs have had the same bargaining power that perhaps some of the larger MGAs, like Penn or Dual, have in the market. And I'm not sure if they would be in the same position.
You have less power, but you've got more ability to get the information, because in a big company with hundreds of people all over the place, getting an MI is really tough. Just gathering that report is tough.
We've now got a couple of mics. Does that make it any better? I'm probably not the best test because I do have quite a loud mouth. Perhaps you should speak, Alistair. You're far quieter than I. Would you like to?
Okay. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Is that all right? In all the corners of the room. Yeah.
What do you see the biggest cultural challenges that MGAs will have to get through to say their conduct efficient, or we've got this risk well managed?
Peter, do you want to have a go answering that question?
cultural challenge. I think it's demonstrating it really. It's those of us, just going back to the Lloyd's minimum standards again, it's hard, it's easy to say that you have the right sort of spirit and you have the right attitude and the right sort of ethos, and you've given everyone the training and you've tried to put it into job profiles and things, but is that enough, I suppose, would be my question. I guess if you've got, I guess I'm answering it as I go along, really. That is the way we went about it. Culture seems quite an evanescent sort of concept when you're talking about conduct, but if you've got it in job profiles, if you've done all the training, and if somebody comes in, an auditor or regulator, and asks members of staff, and they can provide that the appropriate sort of feedback or report or comment about what their role is and what their attitude is and what their place is in the scheme of things, then I guess your culture's looking in fair shape. And the other thing, I guess, is remuneration is a big issue for culture as well. If your remuneration is sensible and not conflicted, then you're...
I've got a question for you guys. How many businesses target their staff on financial goals and financial targets for how many businesses? Does everybody do that? Everybody probably does. How many businesses target their staff on defined behaviours? And if you do, then you've got a chance of hammering it home. And how many businesses pay, not just on the hard line, how much business did you write, how much business did you do, how many of your businesses actually will dock somebody's pay if they're going getting completely legless in Leadenhall Market every day and coming back and shouting at people in the afternoon, even if they're brilliant at their job. And the answer is, if we don't do both of those things, then we're not really, staff aren't going to take the message.
So, can I ask you if you have a view on that?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take your point, because we run a balanced scorecard, and but only just recently. And in terms of driving some of those metrics, some of those now are behaviour-based. Now then, it's not quite, maybe not the percentages we want yet, but that's only been fairly recent.
Does anyone else have a view on how you demonstrate culture?
Sarah, can I throw one on the table? We've heard about managing agents, we've heard about one or two other things. Do you have a view with regard to unrated paper?
Me personally.
Well, generally speaking, if you think, it seems to me that the flow downwards, surely the flow should also be upwards.
Yeah, well, all I would say is, if you're finding it more difficult to find if you aren't able to demonstrate your compliance with regulatory needs and requirements, I'm not sure in the future how comfortable the better rated paper will be to stand arm in arm or hand in hand with you. So if you can't demonstrate that you can run your business in a conduct focused or customer focused way, then I'm not sure if you'll have any choice. It may be Obson's choice to take unrated. Does that answer your question or not really?
It does to an extent. The thing that would worry me is if the board decided we're going to use this route, and then lower down things start to emerge. How can you persuade the board to change tack?
The whole point of having a conduct embedded within your culture is to encourage challenge and give the forums for that debate to take place and for decisions to be recorded. Whether or not you will be successful in changing your board's view, I'm unsure, but you should be given that forum to challenge, and one should be looking at their board as an embodiment of what that business stands for, which ultimately in this day and age is they have to be followers of a professional organisation, I would say. I don't know, Alistair, do you have any views?
Just really a reflection on your last point, that if the board's not getting told about it, then something's gone wrong, I think. And reflecting on the previous question, I think you'd asked about culture. I think that speaks to another answer to that, which is culturally, this really has to be with the board. They've got to own it and deliver it, and they've got to embrace the behaviour. I thought it was really, really striking that you, the point was made by Graham and Peter, that you've got to get on the front foot and embrace this and own it. And I think that applies not just with with the carriers you engage with, but also in your organisation. That's the way the board should be thinking about this, so that it really flows down through the organisation. And I am digressing, excuse me, but the point about measuring just pure financial performance and the limitations of that is one that sort of struck home for me, because as a business, we have and continue to, and I think it's not just us but all law firms, struggle with how you measure partner performance on the financial side against the softer skills of customer management and staff development and business development. So we are sort of living the very same, I think, difficulties that you have, and it's not easy, but for a well-managed business, whether it's an MGA or a carrier or a law firm, you've really got to target those softer metrics and make sure people understand what they need to do to step up to deliver against them.
Some of you went along to Barron's talk about the Insurance Act, and I think David was very clear about what's coming through on that Act, and obviously we've got about 6-7 months still to go. It's not that long, is it? It seems to fly past. The Act will be very prescriptive about the questions that you as MGAs are going to ask, or your staff are going to ask in relation to the placement of risks, and how you're going to make sure that all the relevant details are answered in all the relevant ways. The question really for Alistair, I suppose, but anybody else can chip in. That will mean a whole different way of underwriting. That will bring around a whole different culture of underwriting, because you as MGAs will be on the hook if you get it wrong. What impact do you think that will actually have on the whole conduct of the underwriting process?
I think that's a really good question, David. I think if you go back, before I get to your question, but if you go back to some of the Law Commission consultation papers, there's a very strong thread that what this contract reform was doing, not just in the consumer space with CIDRA 4 years ago, but also with the legislation around Commercial Insurance Act last year, was to bring more professional discipline to both sides of the underwriting process, both on behalf of the proposer and the person, the organisation accepting the risk. And when you boil that down and look at what's in the Act, duty of fair presentation can be satisfied in the conventional way, just full disclosure of every material circumstance, etc., or in the new variant, which is putting sufficient information before a prudent underwriter to cause them to ask questions. And I think that's the more interesting, because the risk appetite then has to be documented. What sort of questions would you ask? What sort of responses would you expect? What would your reaction be to those responses? And I think that, looking at that fulfilment of the duty of fair presentation, becomes, I think, clearer to link to a conduct-based regime, because there's a very clear need to have that documentation and those processes in place up front. So I think, David, it is a sea change. I think it sits quite nicely with embracing conduct risk, but as to the fine detail of the day-to-day impact, I think it's probably too early to say. But in terms of record keeping, documentation, and just being aware of what the organisation's response would have been had you known at the time, I think those are really the critical things under the new regime from 5 months or so, 12th of August.
Can I ask, what do you think the rating implications, and I'm referring to risk rating implications of embedding greater conduct risk, for example, might be? Because in my experience, historically, MGAs have not always been the most willing participants at the claims table because of their understanding of what that's going to do to imperil their future prominence with carriers. But if we're flipping more into, and I think it's appropriate, a greater alignment with customer outcomes, claims being paid, greater clarity around that within the Insurance Act provision, etc. Who's going to pay for all of that? Yeah, we're in a market where CORs are challenged, expense ratios are being looked at. There are some efficiency models coming in, but
Sorry, Graham can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm saying you've got to pay the claim, and the outcome if you don't, even if you suspect there's fraud but you can't prove it, the outcome is just too painful not to. So the answer is the carrier's got to, we're all going to bear the cost of local conduct, but that's the point of looking at the consumer outcome, isn't it? And then user outcome, just as your worst COR. But that's part of the reason why the industry needs a conduct regime, because there haven't been great customer outcomes always.
I think it's a good point, and to a certain extent, there's been a bit of an elephant in the room around the Insurance Act, that if the proposition, and if you read the material from the government when they produced the legislation, if the fundamental proposition is that products in the industry will perform better and respond more frequently and in a more customer-appropriate way, that seems to me to be saying more cover in wider circumstances. And if you're getting more, then, as night follows day, in a conventional market, you'd expect to be paying more for it. That may not be the case, but whether that conversation is really being had at the moment, I'm not sure.
No, not am I.
Yeah.
It's a classic conflict, though, isn't it? That you pay your claim, and which is what you're supposed to do. It's the right thing to do, but it damages you commercially. That conflict has to be managed and managed appropriately. And as Graham said, that will ultimately cost money. But that's the alternative.
No, I don't. But we seem to live in a market and environment that every year seems to be -5, maybe -10, but normally -5. And at some point, that's going to have to change.
Yeah.
It's going to have to change.
Aren't we as the market the ones that have the power to do that?
I don't know. We operate in the greatest subscription marketplace in the world, and that means it's extremely difficult to unilaterally change that dynamic. Really.
I guess there's value to be had in saying that you provide a good service, that you are well on top of conduct, so that you've got your frameworks and your procedures and so forth, and that you take conduct very seriously, and that you pay claims when they're due and promptly.
That's right. I mean,
you get advantage from it. I guess you're then offering a premium service. You can afford to charge more for it.
Yeah, and let's not forget that, as you said, Peter, paying claims promptly, there is a provision which probably being debated in Parliament today on damages for late payment of insurance claims in the enterprise bill, and that's going to be hanging at the back of all of this. Comes in on a slightly different date than the Insurance Act itself, but we're going to need to deal with that in the fullness of time as well.
But on the point of capacity in the market, there's a wall of money constantly around the world. But the thing is surely that we've got to develop differentiated products that give people something a bit extra, a bit different, and then we have pricing power. If we're only, and that is back to customer outcomes, so we have to be customer focused in what we do, not carrier focused in the products. And if they're differentiated, then you may be able to achieve some pricing power. But if you don't, it's commoditized, we're going to go down with the market.
That would be my view. I think rather than it being a drain or being regarded as a drain on resource and a drain on the cost on the expense ratio, we should actually see it as a product differentiator. Because actually, if you do ultimately offer the customer and provide the service the customer is expecting when they take their policy, when they submit a claim, then actually you should retain that business. And there's lots of data out there to say if you deal with claims appropriately, someone will stay with you. That's all they're looking for. So you should see it maybe as a product differentiator.
To be honest, I was actually going to ask you a question about whether this provides an opportunity or a landscape for differentiation, actual differentiation, or whether, because of the way we're moving into greater regulation, etc., it's levelling that playing field and it's preventing that differentiation from actually occurring.
I think it will be dependent on the business. So the business that does it well, I think, has a future. The business that can't demonstrate that they do it actually is pretty bleak out there for them.
We're all sitting here agreeing on what needs to happen, and it feels like everyone's doing it. But I suspect there'll be quite significant parts of the market out there who do it a lot worse than we will be doing it.
I mean, maybe we should ask Gabrielle, if that's all right, Gabrielle. I mean, how are you finding it as Lloyd's, and your cover holder, as far as cover holders are concerned, are your managing agents feeding into you as far as cover holders? Are they finding it tough, or are they finding generally the cover holders are being able to provide what is effectively pretty basic information which Lloyd's are requiring?
So
from a conduct perspective.
The MI side.
Yeah.
I mean, the feedback that we've got from cover holders ourselves, because we held a number of cover holder roadshows to get that feedback directly, was that most people are able to provide that information. Those that can't provide it immediately, it's because there's some system changes that would need to take place, but the vast majority said that they're able to provide that MI. I think there's some stats in our latest newsletter, actually, which I did bring a copy of, which actually sets out the percentages of the responses we got from cover holders directly saying what they could provide and where there were difficulties, which is on lloyds.com if anyone wants to have a read of it. So that's our latest update on MI. It was from November, but if anyone hasn't seen it.
Hi, Mark O'Grogan. Sort of a question to the panel, but also everyone else here at large, particularly that is owning, running, managing MGAs accordingly. A few questions there. One of the things I think that we've all noticed, and I think everyone else has noticed, is that the degree of compliance, generally, whether it's Insurance Act, whether it's conduct risk, any one number of things, is clearly becoming more and more and more work and more burden all the way around. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that the roles of underwriters in particular over the last 10 years have shifted sort of from an 80-20 mix, if you will, from underwriting to compliance, to arguably now probably a 60-40 split the other way, where more and more time is spent on compliance. So a few questions to that, and I think everybody here recognizes that. First one is, to Graham's point before around the impact of behavior. Certainly one of the things that we've often looked at is when we look at binders in terms of how binders are constructed in the market and the economic incentives that go with them, they're very much weighted towards premium income generation and profitability. And one of the things that we've long believed is, well, if the work is shifting from underwriting, if you will, to more compliance, has anyone seen that actually affected in terms of binders in the market? I.e., is there any incentive, positive or negative, insofar as better run, better managed business? It may not be specific to conduct risk, but all the other elements that go with it. First question. Second question is I know that we feel, certainly we try to keep our, I'll call it the back office, if you will, minimized within our business. We try to make sure that more and more of our staff are frontline, focused on underwriting and claims, touching customers accordingly, and then all the other functions there we try to keep to a minimum. And absorbing this, if you will, within the management is always more and more challenging. How have others found that there are better, smarter ways, I suppose, of operating, or finding better ways of handling this in the background, or smarter, better ways of managing conduct risk generally in their own organizations without sort of putting on teams, hiring a lot more people to be able to handle it? Those are the two questions.
Does anyone from the floor have a view on that?
We're quite a small niche MGA, so we don't have a huge headcount. But one of the requirements is going to be that we go out and audit all of our introducing brokers' conduct risk every year. And it's simply not achievable based on the income we derive from the binder and the ability. I don't see some of our brokers being particularly happy with that. I think that comes back to the original comments about the position of the MGA and RPPD. Who's the agent and how far does that go? And they were trying to push that sort of agency down towards the introducing broker, even though traditionally we've always treated them as an agent of the insured.
Yep. Not so necessarily. I haven't actually seen incentives within binding authorities for good conduct. However, I have seen provision for conduct MI and reporting, failure of which to provide that would result in a breach of contract claim, as against the MGA. So although expressly there isn't a carrot, if you like, there's a definite stick, even if it's only inferred, I think, in some of the reporting clauses and some of the binding clauses that are in the market. I don't know if anyone else shares that view. Maybe, is anyone else? Graham, you might be better placed.
I haven't seen that, but we had 2 cover holder audits specifically around conduct, and that's the first question that came and asked was how's your conduct looking? Show us everything. And the delegated underwriting authority and how we abided by that was not questioned. That was the specific focus of it was the conduct audit. And I think, to your point on this, it's going to drive smaller MGAs. It's going to drive consolidation because you can't. The only way to do this is either throw more bodies at it, which is investment, or spend money on technology, which is investment. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's very hard for a subscale business to do that because so whereas so that what you'll see is that, and it's what happened in hedge funds. Hedge funds 30 years ago, you could get away with £10 million under management. Then it was 20, then it was 50, then it was 100. And we're going to go through the same problem in MGA land, I think, as that, because the fixed cost of operation has just gone through the roof, and so that puts even more pressure on you to get economics to fund the business, which makes it very difficult. So at the moment, it's a good time to be an MGA, but if you look forward at this, like political correctness unrolling itself, it only ever gets worse or more intense, I should say. But basically, the compliance is not going to roll back. It's going to get more intense for us, and that's going to raise the fixed cost, and it's going to raise the reasonable amount of premium that you need to put through at a certain amount of commission to be able to run a business in a compliant way. No question. Even if you're going to do it all in the cloud with really modern systems, you're going to have to spend a lot of money to do that.
Does anyone else have experiences to help this gentleman to share?
I mean, I'd just be interested in other people's ideas because we're challenged with it. If there's other smarter ideas, we'd be elated to find out what others are doing. I mean, to me, that's somewhat the purpose of this forum is to exchange ideas in which we all can learn and benefit from. And this is just one of those areas where it genuinely is. If there's better, smarter ways. It's funny because I think in many ways, I think many of the areas of compliance, we're starting to see tool sets that are coming out that are starting to automate much of that in the background, which then makes it easier for all of us that are trading businesses of sorts to be able to then say, right, we've done that, we've done that, we've done that, and rather than it being embedded within policies that one has to figure out and look at models and the rest of it, a lot of that then becomes much more systematized and makes it easier for us to say, have we done this, have we done this, have we done this on on the conduct risk side, but more laterally, I think, just in general compliance. I think those things sort of help us out, if you will, because we all have got an awful lot to juggle.
I think they're both really great questions, and I suspect that but for these podcasting devices, meaning that everything's on the record, you might have got a different set of responses, and maybe people will be slightly freer with their comments over a drink a little bit later when we wrap up.
Does anyone else feel able to share some of their experiences, or because we do still have some time?
What's the stance of the panel and obviously Lloyd? If you've gone through trying to encourage all your cover holders to fill out all the information, also trying to get all your carriers to fill out the information, but you've got those few left that says, no, I'm not doing it. What's the stance? What would Lloyd do? Does that mean how would you turn them? How would you get them, encourage them to fill the information out?
I mean, from our point of view, it's the managing agent's job to work with their cover holders to get the data that they need. We have not yet got to the point where we're saying if you're not getting it or you can't get it right now, you need to cancel that binder. I can't tell you. At some point in the future, there has to be a point there where if it's not forthcoming, and if it's not forthcoming, we ask the agent to ask themselves, well, why is this cover holder why are they unwilling to provide this information? What does that say about the culture and how conduct risk is being taken seriously there? So while we don't we haven't said anything about, what that means for those binders right now. I think that for our managing agents, anyone that's unwilling, given the minimum data requirements that we have put out there, are not. So the feedback we've gotten, as I said, from coholders is that most of them can provide it. This isn't crazy information. As you've heard, other carriers are asking for more, but in the same vein. And I think if someone just doesn't want to provide it, then why is that? What does that say?
Yeah, I mean, I would support you, Gabriella, in that. I think any business who decides to trade with another organisation or use them in their distribution chain and they're unwilling to provide information about their own governance and their stance on certain things, then one needs to question why one's actually doing business with or through them. Because I think that suggests that maybe the culture isn't customer-centric, which is what conduct is requiring everyone to do.
And obviously I spoke earlier about the pressure that Lloyds is under from the FCA. If ultimately Lloyds won't be able to afford to continue to trade with counterparties who are not towing the line, because it will show up that those standards are slipping or being waived for certain for reasons that are not justifiable. So yeah, we will get to a point, I imagine, in another year or so where that's maybe a very small number. They'll have to go and find their capacity somewhere else.
Either that or they will be swallowed up by larger MGA businesses or join larger MGA businesses who can provide that infrastructural support for them.
The model for all this is bank and hedge funds again, when there was a wall of money went into these hedge funds between 2001 and 2007, and then performance was all anybody cared about, was how you did. And then suddenly, when Madoff made off with the money and Stanford was flying around in a gold-plated helicopter at Lloyd's cricket ground, you suddenly realised that other things mattered, like the auditor you had was above a fish and chip shop in Ealing. That can't be right. Give me a break. And so the warning signs were just there. People ignored them because all they looked at was the money being made, ostensibly made. And since then, a load of those hedge funds have gone out of business because they don't get it. They don't want to have Goldman Sachs, their prime broker. They don't want to have the right administrator. They don't want to have Price Waterhouse, it's too expensive. And people just won't give them money. And I think that's the model for us. We won't get delegated authorities from our capital providers unless we are doing the best we can and we're showing the best standards. And the model's there clear. The ones that get it do well. The ones that either don't get it, can't get it, and really struggle.
Yeah, I mean, I would say put yourself in your insurer's shoes. If they can't satisfy the regulator from their own reporting requirements, why would they want to do business through you? Why wouldn't they use someone with whom they don't expose their own business and senior managers to personal liability?
Sarah, playing devil's advocate there, though.
That's kind of what I was hoping.
Well, with no axe to grind here at all, but
sure.
Do you think that maybe, from what was suggested earlier by the panel, maybe this is a time for MGAs to take take the first step forward? Should maybe not, as a consortium, people that feel they can meet these exacting standards, which they are compared with what has gone in the past, maybe there should be some sort of party going to the insurers saying, look, it's costing us here in a very competitive market. Is there nothing that can be done for people that meet these standards today? We understand that it may not be forever, but turning it around the other way, because this is making insurers' lives easier as well. I mean, that's going to be less administration, less hassle for them. It's not all one way. I don't think this all falls, or should all fall on the MGA. And maybe there's a role here for the MGA in terms of as a consortium saying, as a body representing whatever percentage it is now of the business, to turn around and say, look, there are people here, most of whom in this room today, who do recognise this and turn it around. And we do have to pay for technology, we do have to do these sort of things and employ a higher standard. And maybe we should go back and say to the insurers, who I'm sure would understand in a way, you're not asking for something for nothing, but we're going to give
I don't necessarily disagree. I think your point is very valid on the MGAA. Obviously, that's something I think we should perhaps, put to them. But I do think, as a body or as a effectively an emerging third sector of the market, I think that's what we should be considering. We should be going back and saying, actually, these are the standards that the MGAA market can comply with. If you want more, then maybe you need to help us more to be able to build that infrastructure that we need to give you the data that you're requiring, because ultimately the MGA market is a good way for the insurers to get to the distribution without actually being in the forefront of the sales chain. So we are key for the future. So maybe you're right. I don't think it's such a bizarre suggestion to propose the MGA as a good forum to help the MGA businesses. I don't know, maybe I'm going to put Peter on the stand now and he's asked me.
Is that hospital bus?
Thank you, no pressure at all, is there?
No.
Maybe the shoe should be on the other foot. The idea is if you're not at that level, you should not be delegating authority. And therefore we can actually come to the top. And then we're in a position to say, look, we're doing this for you. Let's think about it. And it's something that Jane and I thought about in the past, making sure that we can differentiate ourselves from the others. And that's why we get situations of brokers with binders and qualified MGAs.
And there are also there's a lot of MGA businesses out there that actually aren't even members of the MGAA yet. So what happens to them? Well,
Sarah, can I throw another question on the table? It's interesting you've still got the conduct there. I'm going to throw this one at Graham, and if you can move closer to the mic so we can all hear it. Graham, in your presentation you were talking about business risk and compliance. One little sector underneath there was E&O. Of course, when you look at the slide up on the screen just disappearing.
Oh, sorry, I thought you wanted that one.
Mitigation side, and of course, first on damage insurance. And we're all knowing, those few around the room who joined me, when we met the regulator in December, who was actually looking at intermediaries, and as Sarah said, we are, in regulatory language, intermediaries. Looking at the intermediaries purchasing PI card, and there's a little bit of rumbling that's going on within the market about the adequacy of PI. And I'll be interested in your thoughts about when you're talking on these slides of E&O, what was going through your mind at that time. And I want to throw it back at somebody like Alistair and Sarah and say, right, okay, what should we do? And the point was well made at the back of the room there about what am I going to do if I'm dealing with a conduit, let's say brokers here, and I don't want to pick on them, but they won't give us the data. What should we be doing in relation to those levels? Because a lot of the brokers are buying very, very low PI levels. So, Graham, can you first of all start kicking around why you've got P&O, what's going through?
Well, number one, I never want to be knowingly underinsured, because that would be very a big sin. But I view it as not a necessary evil. But I'm looking for partnership. I'm looking for help with risk management. I'm looking for support when a difficult claim comes along. The first person I want to call is the E&O insurer and say, what do you think about this? What's your opinion from your experience? And so it's an early, you want a good early warning system, and you don't want to undergun it. And so I'm always wanting to buy more than maybe I should do, probably stupidly, because I want to make sure I'm protecting the firm, because it's the shareholders in the firm. Why would you want to protect it? And as I said, if I just shopped around and bought on price and just the cheapest thing I could find, I think I'd get what I paid for. I want to buy policy, and I'd be willing to pay more for better quality service and better advice around it. So it's really important, and I know we took it really seriously at RKH and AQUA, and it was debated at board level, what level do we buy, and are we at the right level? The business is growing rapidly. Have we got the right level here? I think it's really important.
I think, Peter, you aimed a comment at me. One point really was, I think that I understand the point you're making about the need to have protection in place. It just seems to me that if the theme of today is about buying into conduct risk and embracing it and trying to make it a business differentiator, if we go with that, then there seems to me a bit of a disconnect if, in order to support your business doing that, you're buying a arguably subpar product from somebody who's not living that same experience. They're going to be a regulated provider providing D&O cover, and you'd want to check that they're living conduct in the same way that you are. Otherwise, as I say, there's a kind of cultural disconnect, and I think this is so important about getting a cultural fit around how you see conduct, not just in the business narrowly, but also all the partners that you have around the financial services field.
Back in 2010, when we formed the MGAA, we got all the insurers in the room, and the insurers said to us, we actually want to make sure that the audit process is consistent amongst all MGAs. So 5 years later, we were talking to the FCA, we were talking to Lloyd's, and I don't know who was there a couple of weeks ago when Peter Montanaro said, we're trying to make some consistency. Just bringing that into the conduct space here, and I think it's quite difficult. Within Lloyd's, we've got a subscription market. I know there's 3 Lloyd's agents who are acting completely differently with regard to conduct to their MGAs. All on the same slip, which is just a bit difficult for you guys. Turn that into the company market, and the question I asked Peter earlier, I mean, you have a limited experience there, I agree with you, but I'm seeing inconsistency amongst the company market. So, 4 or 5 different experiences from 4 or 5 different underwriting bodies, entities, or whatever you want to call them. How do we get consistency? We talked about audit consistency, and I think audit is fundamental. How do we get conduct consistency? How are we going to bring that into the market? I think it's just developing a further question that was given on the front of it. How do we get that around so that we're not actually developing different conduct systems? Or are we just actually going to say we'll have our conduct and just hope and pray that that's the one that really works for everybody? What do the panel think?
I'd hate to have to paint by numbers. I want to have responsibility for our own destiny on this stuff, and I would hate to have a prescriptive list of things that I had to do. I'd much rather think through the problem, think through my own individual risk, think through my business profile, and come up with something. I would really not want to. This is the jigsaw puzzle you have to put together for it.
Yeah, because otherwise, Graham, anyone could set up a business, right? Exactly the same, because it's all written out.
But it stops you thinking about it.
I mean,
being reactive is going to be a huge startup cost to entering into a new relationship. I think you need to have this sorted out yourself before you begin how you're going to do.
Because it's central and core to your business, actually, isn't it? And how you run it, and what your business stands for, and where you're going to distribute your product, and what your product is going to be. It's so core. I almost think that it would be perverse to have a set of rules that guide what it should be.
It can't be right that one size fits all. And also, if you adopt that consistency argument, really what you're doing is you're not taking responsibility for your own business, really. And I think the point of I think the key to conduct risk is taking responsibility for your business. It starts from that, and then you drive that through. So, I'm sorry, David, I don't agree with you.
No, I'm not saying. It's just we've gone to Peter, we've gone to the FCA as a market. We need consistency of the audit process. We're fed up of answering the same questions to different people in different ways, and we're getting that. And we want consistency on that. And I was just spewing out the question as much as anything. You say, do we need consistency with regard to the basic principles of what the companies are? Now, Lloyd's put out their 88 principles, and we'll pick and choose to make it fit our organisation, our risk profile, our underwriting businesses, and I get that, okay? But what I was saying is you go along to a new carrier that you've not used before, or you go along to underrated paper, and I'll tell you, some of the underrated papers, they don't have conduct anywhere at their core principles. But sometimes you have to use unrated paper just for the simple reason it's the only market that you can actually place the risk with. So all I'm saying is, do we need to have those basic core principles that we all sort of understand between ourselves in this room that embed in every line of every underwriting risk that we possibly can? That may not be possible. I totally agree with that, because writing life insurance and political risk and marine is just completely chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
Insurance, I've always said, and maybe I'm wrong, I look from outside, I'm just a lawyer, forget it. But I've always said that insurance is not one business. It's 80 different types of business. That was just because I counted once upon a time that there are 80 different acronyms in the market. And and if you ignore the PI is 3 of those, that's it. But at the end of the day, there's 80 different industries, and writing one class of business and writing another class of business, there's different things. But are there just those core 2, 3, 4, 5 principles that we could all adopt and enshrine and everything? I mean, we've got conduct and ethics. That's what the MGAA done. We've got our little thing. We want people to do conduct and ethics. But is there those little core things that we could write in this particular area with regard to conduct that we could adopt as a market? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out as an idea and saying, is it possible?
I actually think that would be helpful.
And I think it's a continuum of, like Graham, you were saying, you've actually got that embedded in your business, you've developed it, it's been part of your ethos from the beginning. Others are struggling more with it and wondering what to do. And the vagaries of some of the regulatory dialogue doesn't help that. And then you've got all of the different stakeholders involved in any relationship, all kind of looking at it in different ways. I think where your point is going, if there's actually a common principles around which to have a dialogue that structures that dialogue, that still allows for flexibility. So if you're coming with a very well-developed conduct framework that you can evidence, then that's great. But similarly, others won't have that. And at least if you've got that start point to have a dialogue around, you can start talking about expectations. Because I think one of the challenges is when different parties come together and you're starting with a blank piece of paper, it will take longer to get to that place. So I think there is definitely room for it, so long as it's not imposed in a way that constrains flexibility.
But the core thing is the management desire to do it. If you've got that, then everything else follows. If you don't have that, forget about it.
Yeah, I think there's quite an interesting dynamic there between having the flexibility to deal with this in a manner that really suits your business model. But on the other hand, you've got those 88 points in the Lloyd's minimum standards, and I guess I'm wondering, and it might be a question for you, Gabrielle, to what extent is that a sort of lower threshold, if you like to use an alternative phrase to minimum standards, or is it something people can use as a springboard to provide their own flexibility around conduct, or even more broadly, is it sort of fit for purpose for other markets? I really don't know, but I think there is a tension between what Graham's saying about espousing flexibility, which I really buy into, and I get that very strongly, and on the other hand, the minimum standards approach, which the language of your document at least suggests.
But I think our minimum standards are designed for our managing agents, and they say essentially that you need to understand what your agents are doing. So I think this idea of, as an agent, coming up with what you're doing, and then when whether it's a managing agent or another insurer comes and says to you, what are you doing about conduct risk? I think if you can say, this is what we're doing in these different areas, then they're much less likely to then start trying to impose things on you. If you go in there, don't know what you're doing, and you go, well, if you just do this and this, but then someone else will say do this and this. But if you go in there with a comprehensive plan and you can say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're achieving, and I guess in that regard, some key principles, but I think they could be drawn out of standards, then most people will be receptive to that, because all they need to do is show that they've done their due diligence and they understand how conduct is being managed throughout the chain and through the life cycle of their product.
Okay, as MGA conduct was as new to us as it is to everybody else in the last couple of years. So we had an opportunity, we had to solve on our blank piece of paper. We had what was given to us by our capacity provider, and then we explored what we did with our brokers. Many of whom the word conduct only came between the words financial and authority. A close look. My opinion, just a personal opinion, is that data is data. You need data, but it doesn't actually become useful until you do something with it. You start to ask, what does that data mean? If you collect the data, you might be ticking the box that says, we collect conduct data, but then you've got to actually ask yourself, what does that data mean? If you don't do anything with it, you're not really doing anything with conduct side of what that data has gathered, other than submitting it in accordance with the required return. Conduct is not about data, really. It's about culture, which is the whole point. And we have turned conduct as a subject inside out.
about here, that probably is good a roadmap to how you might establish a conduct regime in business, as we've seen, in terms of covering the basis. The final point I wanted to make was that whatever that says, in a year's time, you can bet it will look different. Because we'll work out we need different things, and I don't believe we're in a cohesive industry where we can get a best of breed document. It would be lovely, but you can bet that where we are in a year's time, somebody else will have thought some other parameter that we need to go and investigate and ask ourselves, is that a good conduct indicator or not? It's a living thing.
Any more questions from the floor? Well, I don't know if that's all right, but I think Jamie might call it a day then, if that's all right. So I'm going to pass over to Peter to do a conclusion, if that's all right for everyone.
A very quick conclusion, yeah, thank you very much indeed. It's been a new month, as we said previously. I want to thank you all for your engagement, guys. Thank you for the questions. I'd also like to thank the panel for sparing the time. I know Alistair is extremely busy, as is Sarah. And Peter, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, as we see, Graham doesn't do a proper job. And Gabrielle, thank you for being there as well. It's been really interesting. We're hoping this will podcast it. We hope we'll do some more of these, but would you please join me